E tu ridevi e ridevi. Tanto tempo fa. Era un paese diverso.
Can't stay here. Let's go. Put the kids in the car, we just go.
Well, I think what men mistake for happiness was, in fact, resignation and patience.
Camille, you home?
And now women are beginning to feel that patience is not the answer.
I don't think she's coming back this time.
Daddy, where have you been?
How could you not want to escape?
You keep your mouth shut, okay?
I finish here at 3. Start today? Yes?
Righto.
This is Maria. She's going to be here after school from now on.
Jack, do you cook?
Ma i cimiteri australiani mi scioccavano. Tutte quelle erbacce, tutta quella dimenticanza.
Chi sta a vita? Chi sta a felicità? Un'ora per abbracciarsi e poi morire.
The kids, they're asking after you. How's Poppy Jim?
Era anche un sogno per me di scappare.
È difficile parlare di certe cose, ma uno ha trovato coraggio.
In Australian cinemas from May 12, Little Tornadoes is the long overdue second film from writer-director Aaron Wilson. Set in early 1970s rural Australia, the film addresses the many upheavals of its time: immigration, post-war resettlement, the women's movement, and the fracturing of traditional family structures into a narrative about a father's struggle to adapt and a new immigrant's search for identity in a foreign land. It is a very moving film. I'm not at all ashamed to say that it got this crusty old critic a little bit weepy. It's a stunning work from Aaron Wilson, who joins us on Screen Watching now. Welcome, mate.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the wonderful introduction.
Oh, look, it's a wonderful film. I was going to say the young director, Aaron Wilson, which you were when Little Tornadoes' journey began. You're not as young now, although you're still very young. I'm quite taken. You must have been like 15 when you started filming this.
Double that, maybe. I think, maybe the stress. I've been pedaling so quick, I haven't had time to worry about aging.
Maybe so.
Yeah.
Listen, well, how has that extended production period, and I guess most notably the post-production period, how do you think it shaped the film? Are we seeing the same film we might have seen 8 or 9 years ago?
Definitely not. I think there's still a core essence there. There's a vision that sort of evolved, I guess you'd say, maybe like a whiskey evolving, or what is it, distilling and fermenting over time. It has the essence of what we wanted, but new people have come on board and different things have happened along the way. So with the new collaborations, new creative opportunities arise. So for example, Christos coming on board, that didn't happen until 2020. And I was very fortunate that he was able to connect with the film, but also bring this poetic, lyrical element to the narration, which juxtaposes against the sort of the visual cinema that we're seeing. And that wouldn't have happened had we finished the film 5 years ago.
Sure. The time and the place in which Little Tornadoes is set is a period of tremendous social upheaval, yet the characters, even the children in the cast, they deal with life with real grace and dignity. And Mark Leonard Winter's, working class country dad, he's not some boorish boozer, which is often sort of the fallback caricature. He's a very decent man facing down these very seismic changes in his life. Who are these people? Were they a type that you grew up with?
There's lots of the world that I grew up around in these characters. There's no one person that reflects a real person, but I just wanted that experience I had growing up, that authenticity, that regional Australian experience with the legacy of, I guess, people coming back from the war in the previous generation, the PTSD of that knock-on effect, how it affected the families and communities. They just created all these really interesting people and stories in the community that I heard growing up. Or you hear about characters who live out on the farm, and you sort of, he has to be working with a stick because every time he wakes up, he has this sort of reaction that's an echo of his experience at war. All these experiences and stories that I heard, they've all found their way somehow into the fabric of this story. So it's very much inspired by my upbringing, but also the idea of the community being something that is, people feed off each other and they know about each other. So I wanted to reflect that in the film.
It is also, in my research for the interview and having watched the film, I understand it's also what you hope to be the middle section of a trilogy of sorts, led out by Canopy, which I remember thinking was an extraordinary film back in the day. And I remember seeing that at a press preview and just being blown away by it. So exactly at what point did the two tie together? Can you give us some sort of idea for the fans of Canopy and those that remember it so fondly?
Yeah, I think the first film is set in 1941. An Australian soldier sent to war, and it basically explores his experience over the course of one night after he's being shot down in the jungle of Singapore. And it's really just more of an experience than it is a traditional film narrative. But the idea is that you understand after that film how it might feel like for someone to have gone through something like that and how that experience might stay with them. So now this film is 30 years later, and we have a character like the character from Canopy in the background. He's the grandfather. He's removed, really. He's disconnected from the family and life. He doesn't say much. He just goes about his business. He's physically isolated, which helps him. So you understand that sort of character. You understand where he's come from. And there's even a snippet from Canopy in this film. So it's just enough to make you go, oh, okay, I know what's happened. I know his backstory. I can understand the context now between him and his son. So I just wanted to set up that dynamic between different generations in these regional Australian worlds, and just to reflect how experiences like what we saw in Canopy can stay with someone and how they have this knock-on effect down the generations, how they have a lingering effect on the family members when they return home.
And there's further layered drama in exploring the immigrant experience in small town country Australia. And we should point out, this isn't they're a weird mob in the bush. There's a lot of complexity to what Sylvia Kaluka's Maria, and Fabio Motta's Tony add to the plot dynamics. How much was there from the start? You mentioned the role that Christos brought on to the production. Was a lot of that his input as well, or once again, was this something you were familiar with from your own upbringing?
I think the characters of Tony and Maria and what they represent have been there since the beginning. When Maria does appear on screen, she brings this color and energy and brightness that the tone of the film shifts as a consequence, and you see the effect of her presence on the family, a core family, that the food reflecting sort of something very different, and it looks different, and the colors very vibrant. That was always there in the story, but I think what Christos did is he really distilled and fine-tuned that color and energy and gave it an extra voice. So in the film, we see our main protagonist, Mark. He's this Australian guy. He doesn't really say a lot, but we see what he goes through. With Maria, we feel her coming into the world through her voice. The narration is this poetic introduction, and it's the way she talks about the world and comments on how this environment is such a strong character in its own right. So she's able to articulate beautifully in words and poetically what this world means, its power, its significance, but we see how that plays out in the imagery when we see the male character. So I like the juxtaposition between what we're seeing on screen versus what we're hearing through the wonderful narration that Christos has created.
Yeah. I've long believed that there's no more beautiful country on film than the Australian outback and the Australian landscape. And in your film, in a couple of beautiful scenes, the Australian skyscape. It's so evocative in this film. How would you define the relationship between the film and its rural setting? What role did this amazing country play in the film's drama?
Look, I think from the beginning, it's always been a character for me. And my cinematographer, Stefan Dossio, who comes from Cobram, across the river from where I grew up, we know this world quite well. We know that sort of the ins and outs, the places that are quite special to us. And we wanted we did a lot of recce's before we even filmed, and we wanted to really explore spaces that felt important to us, that had feeling and significance, and put them to film and into the story. So they help build a sense of character for this world. So people who aren't from this world might, I guess, feel really intrigued by this space. Even the soundscape is different, the animals at night. And as you shift from day to night, the sounds change. So we wanted a sense of a character that shifts and changes with the day. And as they change, they affect the human characters in the world, because that's very much how it is if you grow up in this world. You feel very small in the presence of the natural world, and you're very aware of the overwhelming presence of nature. So it was really important for us to, from the beginning, to create this strong sense of character to the world.
I guess finally, what makes it contemporary? What are the themes and issues that still impact or need discussion or resonate today that remain holdovers from that period in Australian history?
It's a good question. I think the story at the core of the film is really about this family going through quite a significant change on a very intimate, personal level. But the context is also a lot of change happening. The social change in the background, in the landscape, the greater Australian landscape, the women's liberation movement, the Vietnam War protests that we hear about on the radio, and the new cultural migration. It's this little change set against the greater social change, and how you have to adapt and move with the times, or else you'll be left behind. That's sort of something mirroring what's happening today. There's a lot of social change over the last 5, 6, 7 years. And how do we adapt to that? And how do we do it together, I think is important. How do we bring each other along rather than being divisive? I'm all about sort of how do we as a people become more inclusive and look out for each other. So I think that's really at the core of the film, focusing on what about that time period do we look back on and go, oh, that was significant. These new people coming into this country, and we had this friction and tension, but now we've moved on. Well, the same thing's happening again. We've got new people coming in to our country, and there's still this friction and fear while this great social change is happening in the background. How do we move forward together and grow? Because Australia is such a small country that when people do come from overseas, they don't, or they bring change and color and energy that ultimately changes our country and our culture. And that's what's beautiful about Australia. It's constantly evolving and shifting. So it's the conversations around this that I really hope the film sort of sparks and kicks off.
I hope so as well, mate. It's a wonderful film. Aaron Wilson, thank you so much for joining us on Screen Watching. All the very best with the film's release from May 12 in cinemas around Australia, and can't wait to see the third film in the trilogy. You create wonderful characters. It's a joy talking to you.
Thank you. May 12th, and then we'll be doing a strong Q&A tour, particularly into regional areas, because we want to take this story out to other regional parts of Australia and really connect with regional audiences, just to have conversation and share stories.
Good luck with it all, Aaron. All the very best.
Thank you, Simon. Take care.
Okay, mate. Bye-bye.